look at. It's too early to tell if any fundraising process will fall over, but they likely will. But similar to what Edward has highlighted, what we are seeing is really three things. A lot of the PE, a bit of VC, but primarily the PE client we're working with is concerns around how their portfolio companies are managing, particularly around liquidity and the general working capital, aspects of supply chain disruptions, and also looking at new operating models for these portfolio companies. We also are aware of transactions that are headed towards financial close. In all likelihood, that will really be delayed. We are having to support clients around cash flow modeling, relooking at risk assessments, and generally even considering worst case scenario, what bankruptcies could mean. I think this huge strain on portfolio companies. Some of them probably were not ready for a crisis like this. We expect that might deteriorate further on the back of the ongoing government directives around lockdown. And as we proceed on this conversation, I think we will share more practical insights on how we are assisting our clients around this, what our view is as EY on how this will shape the private equity and VC industry, and even more importantly, how we can all prepare for a recovery. Thank you.
Great. Kyril?
Andrea, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think I'll begin from where my colleagues have actually spoken on what the PE funds and venture capital funds are actually doing. And I do agree that that's what people are doing today. However, your question is really a very complicated question, as in, how will they be affected? And the true answer is that we really don't know. And people are trying to do the best under the current circumstances. What I do think personally is that even though all that is happening, it's pretty much the high time that people start looking internally to some extent. And by that, what I mean is that insofar as the PE funds are concerned, I think they'll be affected at two levels. One is actually at the fund level, and the other one is actually at the investee level. Now, the fact is that this could go on for a month, 2 months, a year, and we really don't know. What we really do know is that it's going to fundamentally change the way we actually do business. And why am I saying that? It's actually an area of disruption. Now, we've all known for the last 5 years or so that disruption is coming. And we always thought that disruption will come from somewhere else. So I think that this thing that we're actually going through right now is giving us an opportunity to look at disruption in a much more critical way, because we're actually now being forced to look at it that way. And whichever way it goes, whichever way we actually conclude the epidemic we're going through, a fact remains that PE funds will have to look at how they invest. They've got to look at their investment criteria. They need to look at when they actually come in with an investee company and say, we've got X pool of money we want to put into you, it may not continue that way anymore. It may be to the extent that they should be a little bit more flexible to say we can give X support. If you look at the investee companies, their processes will definitely have to change. Now, we know that even without the COVID-19, people are already considering the fact that they were going to change. Only that there was no, what's a correct word to use? There was no urgency in changing the processes. There was no urgency in most of the organizations, at least in this part of the world, to really critically look at all their processes, their back office processes, alternatives in doing business, alternatives in processes. That was not there. And we are forced to do this. So I would basically say that, yes, you do have the economic effect, but looking at it positively, it does give an opportunity for people to look inwards and see how can we actually strengthen some of these things? How can we actually create much more flexibility, including Andrea, to basically say this, that we also have to look at our compliance levels and the people running compliance. It's a high time, I think, today, we start becoming a little bit more open on how we look at transactions, how open we actually accept ideas, how open we would be in dropping some of the traditional things that we've been doing in the past, and so on and so forth. That's basically my take on this.
Thank you, Cairo. And Gladys?
Thanks, Sandhya. I think most of it has been said in terms of what the PE and VC industry is going to look like going forward, because it's a disruption, as Cairo mentioned, but it's both financial and also it also disrupts the human resource aspect of it. So as Frank said, you're talking about supply chain disruptions for the portfolio companies, but then you're also looking at the PE and VC industry in terms of their ability to even monitor this portfolio companies. What BCPs do they have in place to ensure that even them as VC and PC and PE are able to continue in this environment? And then when you think about the economies in East Africa and particularly Kenya, it's been a rough time for most portfolio companies, and you have to then eliminate the pre-COVID issues and the post-COVID issues, and how does an entity deal with this? There are some that, some PEs had just invested in entities that put aside, funding for expansion, but you have an emergency, so it means you have to actually then, look at ways of basically allocating these funds to the emergency and postponing some of your expansion plans, and this will have an impact on the IRRs going forward. So the other question is, do you hold your portfolio companies a bit longer to take care of this blip? So there's a lot of decision making that needs to be put into place around this. So it's crisis management, all hands on deck. Throwing away the box because it doesn't, help you anymore. It's about thinking of more innovative ways about how you're going to manage portfolio companies going forward, how you're going to fundraise going forward if you are fundraising, and how this impacts as well the investment horizon. We have a number of PE firms who've had to put transactions on hold because the investee, the potential targets don't have the technology in place to allow for for virtual data rooms. So nobody is able to travel anywhere in the region. And so these deals have got to be put on hold. And how does that impact then valuation and timing and everything else?
Thank you, Gladys. I think we're set up to go straight into our other question, which has really got to do with PE firms' ability to take care of their teams and ensure continuity of critical processes. We find that investment is usually a lengthy process and requires a lot of frequent and physical interaction, both with LPs and existing investees, and it goes beyond the actual reports tables to founder tenacity and ability to deliver the growth. And the decisions are not necessarily made by one person, with teams sometimes being regional or international. So how does business continuity take place in that context? And this is for Edward and then Gladys again.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Sandhya. Yeah. I mean, I think I find it difficult to give advice directly to PE VC firms on how to look after their people. But what I can do, I think, is talk about what we're doing here, and what measures are sensible, I think. So for us, for INM Burbidge Capital, we basically have had the team working from home in almost all cases for nearly 2 weeks now. We sort of saw that coming. I'm sure that lots of people did as well, because it's coming. This is coming here a little bit after it's obviously hit in other parts of the world. So you're able to sort of track. It's quite useful, I think. Reading the Financial Times and looking at global news, what's happening there. It gives you some idea on what's coming here next. I think that I found that probably the most useful of all, actually. So when the president's directives came out, you know, we're well prepared for that. And so I think obviously the number one thing is making sure that people don't take any risks at all. You know, making sure that the team stays safe. We've had a lot of input from HR. I've had quite a lot of legal input as well, actually, you know, which I'd also recommend. You know, but I think there's a personal level as well. You just can't be all sort of legal and that sort of thing at the moment. So for us, we created a lot of WhatsApp groups immediately. We have one for all of our team, and then divided up the various functions and responsibilities into other WhatsApp groups. We use Zoom. I mean, Zoom must be, you know, I imagine their revenues are in pretty good shape at the moment. I think thankfully, we'd already upgraded our subscription on Zoom. You know, there's a free one that everybody uses, but we upgraded ours a while ago to the one that you pay a subscription for, which means that you could stay on it for a decent length of time and all those kind of things. So if people haven't already done that, I, you know, highly recommend that. And then I think, you know, you mentioned internationally, we have an office in Uganda as well. That's an additional challenge because directives and regulations are different there. You know, it's sort of slightly behind here because the announced cases have amounted slightly later there. But again, it is following the same sort of pattern. You know, and really it's been about the ability to, you know, to allow team members to work from home, video conferencing, phone, WhatsApp groups, and staying engaged. You know, you've got to speak to all of your team. I think I speak to every single one every day. A lot of them a lot more than that. Engaging with the clients. You know, I think most people have put out email shots to update their clients that, you know, they're continuing, they're able to still service their clients and do things more or less as usual. But, you know, the number one thing that we're all thinking of is, you know, is making sure that people, you know, stay as safe as possible, don't take any risks, and try not to spread the virus. That has to be number one, but then all those other continuity things have got to come in place. I think most people probably, you know, have BCPs that they've been practicing. Certainly as regulated entities, we've had to do that for a long time now. So I think some form of activation of those has been very helpful as well.
Thank you. And Gladys, anything you'd like to add?
Okay, thank you, Andy. One of the things I've discovered during this time is that, you know, our head of IT is my best friend. Because you just have to keep in touch and troubleshoot and just make sure the systems work. So it's about, when you think about PE and VC, it's about equipping your people to work anywhere, so remotely, wherever it is. And the same then applies also if you have your, you know, your IC as well, and your board members being able to connect with them remotely during this time, because business does need to go on. You know, personal safety, as Ed has said, you know, you cannot overemphasize, just to make sure that your staff are well. Mental health is becoming a big issue. You know, some team members leave alone, so they have no one to speak to. So it's about how do you ensure that you keep in touch with them to make sure that, you know, everything is working out for them. How do you encourage them? How do you put into place protocols of, you know, when they're anxious about something, or if they've either been infected or affected, what are the protocols, and how do they ensure that the healthcare providers are able to reach them on time and take good care of them? You know, making sure their counseling service is available. And also ensuring that then also your portfolio companies have, you know, a good and robust BCP in place. I mean, this is the test, of course, because again, if you're a portfolio manager and you can't reach the portfolio companies you're managing, then you'll get frustrated. So it's about listening to what we are being advised by the, you know, the authorities. Ensuring that your teams keep away from all the bad news and only use the right channels, not to overdose on news, because it can be quite depressing and take away productivity from the team members.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Gladys. I'll go to our next question, which is really looking at assessing sectors that are likely to be most affected by the prolonged duration and severity of COVID-19, and how best to support portfolio companies. Really looking at where also are the upcoming opportunities, and how do fund managers meet commitments to the investors, especially for new funds, where pressure to deploy capital quickly is even higher. And should fund managers should be asking investors for a break before they give their portfolio companies one. So this question is going out to Frank and Cairo, just looking at the sectors and the support. Thank you.
Starting off on the sectors that are likely to be most affected by a prolonged duration and severity, I think there are two ways to look at this. We're looking at sectors that will be negatively impacted, and those that actually stand a chance to actually reap some benefit out of this. So to start off with, from the analysis that EY has done, and a lot of this is out in the public space as well, businesses that have high social contact are going to be severely impacted. Of course, the examples there would be hotels and restaurants, because simply people are having to stay at home, government directives around lockdown, and that by default means the clientele really is not coming into the shop floor. Secondly, tourism and related services, to the extent that travel restrictions are in place, or indeed ability to keep those hotels and tourist spots open, including entertainment spots, is severely restricted. Therefore, those are in no likelihood to get going to get already experiencing low occupancy levels, low guest levels, and having to take drastic measures to manage that. Manufacturing, to the extent that you have long tail supply chains, highly dependent on other countries or indeed other third parties that themselves are impacted. Particularly if you have, for example, have to rely on supplies from places like China for some of your inputs. And of course, now that the crisis has hit Western Europe and the US, that too then impacts how entities perform their manufacturing capacities, and more importantly, how they then are able to manage the existing inventory. There are other obvious candidates. Logistics has its own severe challenges and will continue to be. And the education sector obviously has had its impact as well. And of course, entertainment. There'll be others, but what I would also want to highlight is the flip side of this, which is which sectors can actually benefit quite out of this. And I don't mean that in an unhuman way, but from a commercial perspective. So entities that are servicing the pharmaceutical industry, whether directly or indirectly, stand to benefit directly from the private sector, the typical private customers, but also from some of the support that's coming from the government and other development institutions. It's obvious now that we are at home. A lot of people supporting, gaming and video conferencing, e-learning. Those stand to actually benefit quite a lot. And on the flip side as well, there are entities that will be able to change their operating models. So, for example, restaurants changing to a takeaway type approach to servicing customers. Those will stand to gain. So we are seeing clients actually that are seeing this as an opportunity to redesign how they do business and to actually take advantage of that. Perhaps one other thing to mention around the severity. Look, the way we are interfacing with our clients is saying you need to get into a scenario planning process that enables you to say, look, best case scenario is we get out of this probably in maybe 3 months. And therefore, what do you need to do? And worst case scenario is this runs on to next year. And therefore, what do you need? What sort of cash modeling do you need to do? What sort of workforce arrangement do you need to do? What sort of supply chain discussions do you need to be having? What are the legal implications of some of your mission critical contracts you have that you need to be looking into? And more importantly, cash is king. If ever there was a time when that phrase hits home, it is now. Cash is king. So how do you reserve liquidity on the face of a prolonged severity around the current pandemic? Lastly, is to say, at the end of the day, this really needs to be handled with a human face. It's important, of course, we keep our workforce and other stakeholders to mind. I think depending on how you manage your workforce now, how you manage your third parties, how you interface with your stakeholders, this will have huge implications on how you recover from this. Either if you mess up your employee relationships, if you mess up your third party relationship, then even your ability to weather the storm post recovery could be affected. Thank you.
Thank you. And Pyro?
Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you, Frank. I really agree with everything Frank has said, and I really don't have very much to add from a sector perspective. It's actually quite true that there are some sectors that will be adversely affected. Some actually will be very positively affected. And if we're going to be real about this, is that, or rather, if we're going to be very optimistic about this, is we can say that this is just an additional factor that has accelerated what was going to happen anyway. If we come to the conclusion that the business models were going to change at a very slow pace, I think all of us are pretty much aware that the brick and mortar kind of business, etc., and we were doing it, was already changing. Something that perhaps we cannot do very much on the sector part. It takes us, what can individual organizations actually do? And I've come to believe that over many years, and this just accelerates the whole process, organizations are actually going to do better than the ones that cannot actually change. And that takes us to one point on what are people actually doing today. Well, agreeing to everybody, or rather agreeing with everybody what they've actually said. And the first question comes up: how many organizations do we have today with management and response unit? How many of them are actually looking at, hold on, can we start experimenting, and we're going to continue doing things the way we were doing the things before? And yes, it will be affected, but it'll still come up, but goods are not going to move the same way as they used to move before. The hospitality industry, the hostels, etc., they were already being disrupted to some extent at a different level. Accommodation will still be there, and what we do with the hotels and everything, what we do with the malls. Education, you're quite lucky, at least if I say lucky, that it's already been demonstrated that e-learning is a true possibility. And it's the people who will actually be there. So I don't think the sectors are actually going to collapse, but they're actually going to change. I'm saying about the human face and everything to it, is that we now have to basically look at our social responsibilities a little bit much more critically. I know people are looking at them, but much more critically, because we've got to get all the people in society to actually accept the businesses and continue working with them. We've got to also start looking at the involvement of what used to call the millennials. I've never really been fully that we can really have good new ideas and actually implement them. So at least we should start looking at bringing the next generation in, accepting their ideas, accepting their concepts. The way the world was moving anyway is they were the future. And we have to really accelerate that and actually bring them on board. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights, Cairo. So now we're just going to go a little bit faster because we have to be able to take some questions. I think there's keen concern when it comes to how to value investments and do deals. It's been employed that the current situation may provide lower valuations, less competition for deals, and more entrepreneurs might be open to give up equity as opposed to debt during such circumstances. However, when the havoc is systematic and threatens a global recession, with the lack of clarity on whether a vaccine will be released soon and the prolonged impact of social distancing being the new norm, how do you see both investment and exit scenarios working when you're doing valuations? And this is a question for Frank and Edwin.
Okay, so I think perhaps I would split this into two ways of looking at it. This is the first bit, which is the technical aspect of doing deals in this environment. As you've already alluded earlier to some of the issues relating to valuations, for example, and indeed which valuation approaches to take, given some of the distress that is in the market. There's going to be difficulties around forecasting models. We are seeing that already with some of the conversations we are having. The contingencies and bad debts and getting our head around that is going to be tough. In the event that this targets, for example, where you're looking to take a stake in a business, if in fact it looks like, you know what, actually the business will have to have a new operating model, then in all likelihood the past performance might have to be either discounted or looked at differently. If you're doing deals that are towards more exits, then obviously the ability to get to exit at fair price, or if at all, indeed, could be an issue. And to that extent, going back to the initial point that Gladys made at the introduction, probably the timelines for doing those deals might have to be, for doing exit might have to be extended. On the operational side, it is true that it was even going to be difficult to access some of the service providers that are necessary to support these deals, whether those are lawyers, accountants, auditors, tax consultants, because deals are not done in a vacuum. You need the ecosystem around it to actually support that. And how do you interface with them? If due diligence can't be done, well, can be done, but probably not done remotely very effectively. Similarly, if you're going to have to validate some of the things on the ground, there are restrictions around that. Credit risk generally is a wash in the market. I think at the end of the day, the industry will have to be very innovative on how it values deals, how it values investments, and actually how it does deals. At the heart of this, to our previous point, is this huge portfolio risk, which is all fully dependent on the impact of cash and the ability to absorb a sustained disruption in this market. Whether you're talking about huge sales losses, whether you're talking about absence of customers, whether you're talking about factory shutdowns, supply chain breaks, as we said, at the heart of this, whether you're valuing investments, whether you're exiting deals, whether indeed you're entering deals, it really will still come down to a conversation around cash and your contingencies around that. That then will lead to what is the nature of the business that you're going to be doing going forward. Is it, as Cairo mentioned, is it more, actually scrap what we've been doing more or less and let's relook at it differently, or more importantly, maybe even worst case scenario, depending on where you're sitting on the table, maybe you're staring at bankruptcies. It's a tough environment for everybody, but I still think that if we take the simple actions around risk assessment, putting in place serious scenario planning, and doing robust cash flow modeling, then deals can be done.
Thank you. Edward?
Yeah, so this is an incredibly complex question. It reminds me, last night my wife was had seen that I was going to be on this, and she asked me to make sure that I prepared properly. You know, she was telling me not to mess it up, obviously. And I said to her, you know, actually, I sort of feel like every single thing I've done this week has been preparation for this conversation. So I think I'm going to try and break down quite a complex question by what the experience has been in the last week or two. You know, the first time I was asked this question about valuation and what the impact is, I really had to rack my brains, you know, and all my financial exams, all my background, negotiating valuations, because it's really complicated, I think. And as Frank said, you know, it cuts in many different ways. You know, for some companies, of course, their revenues are down significantly in the short term. For others, you know, for example, we're doing 4 deals, I think, in the healthcare sector at the moment. 2 pharmacy deals, you know, their revenues are up 3 times for obvious reasons. And so, you know, has the valuation tripled overnight? Has the valuation halved? No, is the answer in my view. If you break a valuation down into its main components, it's 2 sets of comps, right? Trade comps and transaction comps. Transaction comps, they haven't changed. They're based on historical transactions for the time being anyway. Trade comps, which are obviously based on the market price of assets, they would have dropped, you know, in most cases, because equity indices around the world are significantly off, you know, 20-30% in some cases. So yeah, they would have dropped, but then, you know, the next day it might be up 5%. That's happening at the moment. We're getting huge swings, you know, so it can swing back up as well. So it would be a mistake to make short-term adjustments on that basis. The other component is DCF, which in my experience, we tend to value a little bit less than the comparables in this part of the world. That's become complicated. Definitely, you know, everyone is trying to revise their projections at the moment. So, you know, I think it's become quite unreliable in any event. And I doubt people will be putting a lot of emphasis, you know, on that. So I think, frustratingly, in terms of deals being done, you know, it is creating some delays. We already notice, you know, so for example, some of the CPs in relation to transactions, you know, require the lands registry. That's closed at the moment. You know, service providers in some cases on due diligence exercises are moving a little bit more slowly. You know, ICs, investment committees are having to deal with a very fast evolving situation. You know, and so things are taking a little bit longer. But, you know, in many cases, for example, DFI transactions in particular, we're finding that they're continuing to go ahead, you know, to their credit, actually. You know, they're honouring offers that they've made and moving forward towards completion and being quite flexible in some cases to try and make sure things happen, because companies are going to need money, right? More than ever injected into them. So, you know, my view is, and part of the reason I think it's great that we all get together, is that at the moment we should be collaborating even more than usual as a community of advisors, DFIs, PE funds, VC firms, lawyers, accountants, to work out how we achieve that, right? To make sure that we can still get these deals completed and new money injected into businesses and strategic players to come into businesses here. that's the ultimate objective. So I think it would be rash to make hasty changes to valuations and deal structures. We're all doing our best, and I think it's more important than ever that we try and work together and be flexible to find ways that they can continue to happen.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Edward, for your insight. And now we go to our last question so that we can open it up. I've got some interesting questions. This one is really about the typical transaction features that will mitigate worsening in performance. We've seen banks offering to transact with clients who've been listed in credit reference bureaus. We've seen moratorium on loans and restructuring being offered. We've seen the government also use a combination of fiscal and monetary policies to cushion the economy. And we've also witnessed very high trading with the Kenya shilling and dollar, on a record low of 109, not since October 2011. So the question to both Gladys and Cairo is, what can the private equity industry do during this period in terms of some of the transaction features that can be structured?
Thanks, Andia. So there appears to be a new multiple that has come up from all this. So it's EBITDA. So it's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, and COVID-19. Because you just have to you have to just figure out what are the real earnings of this business and what happens going forward. I see you smiling. So it means that then traditional transaction approaches will need to change for now, because you're dealing with a very unique situation. So whereas like when you think about DFIs and the way they structure transactions and they have covenants in place, it is a time then you need to think about relaxing this covenant so that the portfolio companies are not in breach, because the future is very uncertain, because we don't know whether we'll be out of it 3, 4, 5, 6 months out of, and then when do we start counting the recovery period? Is it from the time the government says now all systems are go and it's now, normal operations, and hence is it a 6 to 18 months period after that? Or are we in a situation where if we don't do anything or invest or shore up these portfolio companies, we find that if we don't do anything, then 6 months from now, they may not exist. So it's about looking at the entity you're investing in, looking at how it's going to be impacted by COVID and everything that's happening around here from the perspective of, human resources to key man risk now takes a total new definition, because it's not about whether or not you keep, the good CEO who's been doing ABCD and his management team. It's about how do you do succession planning? What if something happens to these people during this period of the pandemic? So it's about thinking about the risks differently, and what you put into your agreements, relaxing certain covenants that you wouldn't do that before, putting in money that probably will go into infrastructure strengthening. So, your working capital then takes a new definition in terms of how do you provide working capital financing during these times? What is it going to be earmarked for? And then how again do you look at capex, and how do you look at your returns and your holding horizon? Because again, it's not going to be your typical period. And then depending on the sector you invest in, you find that there might be such an uplift that you want to flip the asset long before the investment horizon, and then there are some you'd like to hold for longer, and there are some you might decide you want to exit now because it's just not working and you need to cut your losses and move on. Thank you, Andia.
Thank you,
Andia, no, just to pick up from what Gladys has said, and I fully do agree with her. I also think that this is a high time that, again, we're all talking about change is coming. on how businesses actually do their businesses today. And to a large extent, most of them are very competitive in nature. And probably this is a time whereby the investees and they be looking more closely into areas of collaboration and partnership. And from that, what am I actually saying? If you look at the investee companies and everything, with the resources they have, the cost, the expenses, their route to market, yeah, they're probably going to have to do the opposite of what human beings have to do. Instead of distancing, they need to come much closely together and see how they can actually share on all this. And this is from what we have even said earlier, or someone was telling us about the technology that they have to put in on communication, on marketing, etc. And can you do this in a much more collaborative as opposed to a much more competitive way? If I come to the PE funds example, the PE industry, and this is picking up again from Gladys, today, if you strip out everything from a typical PE fund or a typical venture capital, it's very difficult for them to distinguish themselves. They really do relatively the same thing, relatively the same, to a very large extent, relatively the same. So if you look at Kenya today, and Edward, I hope you'd agree with me, is most of the exits that the PE funds do are almost to another PE fund. And that has to be reevaluated and find a different kind of exit strategy. If you look at how the PE funds invest from the beginning, is again, you're putting extra more money, etc., and we want X multiple when we come out, and that's what we're working towards. Again, that has to be evaluated. Are we willing to stay there longer? Are we willing to put more into the investee company? Are we willing to bring our investee companies closer together to share their resources? Are we willing to bring them also again together from an education perspective and so on and so forth? And for Matt, what I'm actually saying is, if you look at some of the immediate things that people are going to start doing today, is really on the cost cutting. And they're going to start looking at the least critical, but they do have legal implications. Can you share all these legal implications? Can you share all this education? Can you share the experiences on the activities that they're gonna do and how you can actually save costs on this? It's the other part that I think all of them really do need to actually. Sorry, I forget the point I was gonna make. Gosh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Oh, the other part that we really do need to look at is with respect to, even as we're talking right now, technology. Sorry, Andia? Hello?
Oh, no, okay. It's okay. Continue.
Oh, I thought you had told me to actually stop there. Oh, the other point I was going to make right now applies both to PE funds and venture capital, and also to the investee companies, is that, yes, the government, including the Kenya government, is doing a lot to support industry, a lot to support business people, a lot to support the citizens of the country. Now, what that means is that a lot of what is happening today is actually relaxation of a number of things. Effectively, the laws are changing, and they're changing almost on a daily basis. And it's how we actually keep in pace with all these changes that are actually happening. And now we actually get to know about them. So you'll find that, yes, we'll be affected from a hardcore business perspective, but we will also be affected by some of the errors we're going to make. We're going to make many mistakes. Anybody really isn't today. We should anticipate that, and I believe we should anticipate it, that regardless of how long this takes and how we come out of it, the laws and regulations are going to be different. I would not particularly be surprised if, say, the Kenya government at the end of all this chooses that the private equity in the venture capital industry is going to be much more regulated too, to safeguard the investments in the country. So that's a futuristic thing to look at. But we should really start looking at it also.
Okay, thank you so much, Cairo. So I've got two questions that are here that I would like you guys to answer. One of them is from Dodia, and it's one of the key items that COVID-19 brings out is long-term planning in relation to private equity firms. Events like this cause significant shocks. The key item is, does this bring out the need for more permanent capital vehicles that can be structured for the industry? The other one is from Mark. What is the most appropriate intervention by transaction advisors at this time to support clients' fundraising that will ease decision-making on the part of PE firms and investors? So just know we have 7 minutes, and whoever's able to answer those questions, please just jump in with one each or two each in some of those questions. Thanks.
Okay, I didn't mind kicking off, Andrea, if you like. Sorry, just to confirm, the question was whether it raises the need for more permanent capital vehicles in private equity, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Yeah, it's a good question. It just crossed my mind from what Cairo was saying, actually, about this, you know, perhaps being likely to mean that there'll be, you know, for it to be harder for companies, for private equity firms to exit, you know, within the time period. You know, it may cause a delay to exit, a reasonable chance. And so, but you know, that's not a new issue by any means. You know, exits is one of the biggest issues in relation to private equity in East Africa. No question about it, to my mind. And we've all been looking at this for a long time. I mean, I think it's very easy just to say, yeah, I mean, you know, we need longer holding periods of investments. There is a big argument for that in this market. You know, the proposition for private equity is not easy, I don't think. You know, to get in and add that much value and exit within the time period and then return money to LPs, that's not easy. And so, but then again, the point is returning money to LPs. Right? I mean, there aren't that many LPs that are just prepared to wait, you know, for a very, very long time before they actually get their money back. You haven't really got your return on capital until you've got your money back with the additional return. So, you know, you always have to remember with investments and deals, I think, you know, there are two sides to it, and both sides have to be comfortable. I think, you know, increasingly we do see permanent capital vehicles coming to the market, and that is attractive. You know, it's attractive for promoters of businesses as well. But you know, it just depends on the availability of capital and whether they're comfortable. You know, commercial money, increasingly the private equity industry is trying to raise commercial money, and I think that's a good thing. That's progress. But you know, commercial money usually means pension funds, insurance funds, you know, and they ultimately have their own liabilities, and they have to return money to investors in the end. So you know, so it's not easy, but I do think it probably does mean that, you know, some exits will be delayed, and it's possible that conversations will have to be had with LPs and you know, to see if flexibility can be given around that, depending how long this lasts for.
Thank you. And I just want to make a comment on the set of most of the investee companies today, or most of the target companies today, is of the business model and the profitability. The next challenge that always comes up is the governance, the ethics, and the records that are maintained. And right now, for the targets or for the investee companies or for investors out there, or the businesses out there, for them to be easier to be invested into, I think those are the three critical things that they really have to look at, even from a preparation perspective. Is do you have your governance right? Do you have the proper business ethics? Do you actually have the proper records, accounting records, legal records, etc., etc.? Now, if they can start preparing on that and everything, one, it makes due diligence much easier. It makes the software things much easier. And that way, the PE fund can actually concentrate more on actually evaluating the business model, the amount of time that we all spend really looking at the due diligence on your records, etc., and the errors that you've made and so on and so forth, trying to evaluate your business ethics and so on and that kind of stuff. So I think as transactions advisors, as business advisors, lawyers, tax advisors, financial analysts, etc., this is one of the areas that can really help clients in complying with or working along with it, and also basically help the PE funds in evaluating the same. And I think this would apply not just to PE funds, but pretty much to any institutional level.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Cairo. And we've got 2 minutes left, just in case there's any other question that will come up. But just in terms of actually going through what we've discussed, there have been lots of very interesting pointers and areas raised, whether it is looking at some of the mental health aspects for our staff, as what Gladys pointed out, whether it was what Edward said about reading articles like the Financial Times to just stay ahead and be involved. We have Cairo, who's talking about business models that have really been forced to change. We've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution, and maybe this is the time for the millennials. And we really got Frank talking about the innovations that have to come with credit and cash being king, as always. And I think as we look here, to me, it's to basically encourage the industry to contribute against the fight for COVID, which I really think is a fight against a fight for humanity, and make sure that also some of the innovations that are happening now, there's some greenfield innovations, can still take place, and making sure that we prioritize matters that were gaining traction in the field, whether it was gender-led investing or climate-smart actions. And to me, it's one of the times in history that we'll look back and everybody will say, what did you do to save the community and guarantee future sustainability? So we're in uncharted waters, so let's not keep waiting for information. Let's do what we can, and when we can, to play our part. And thank you. We're at 12, unless we're allowed to extend, but we're done now. Okay. Thank you, East Africa Venture Capital Association, for doing this. Thank you so much, Gladys, Edward, Frank, and Cairo, for your insights. And hopefully we'll be at this again talking. And good luck for everybody out there, and stay safe and healthy.
Thanks, Nadia. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.